if it's not easy for you to get in and out of your lock boxes, then that might cause you to kind of cut corners or do things that you shouldn't do. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a way of putting these things away. Like for instance, in my truck, I can put that in there, close this, and that's it. It's just that fast. So I've got a system that it's really simple that I can open up a toolbox, put it away. I'm very fortunate that I've got a newer truck and that it's a remote so that I can unlock and lock these toolboxes with a remote. Now when I first got into the business, it was not that way. I had a key and I had a kind of toolbox that went across the back of my truck, and I was always having to use my key, so that wasn't convenient to get into my pocket and find my key and do that every time. So I had to get a key just for that toolbox made, and I put it on a ring with a tether on it so that every time I got up to the truck, I could just pull that key out, unlock that box, put my pesticides in, close it, and it stayed locked automatically when I closed it. So whenever I went up, I'd take that key out, stick it in, push the button, open it. I had it down to where it was real simple. Because if it wasn't simple and you're dealing with this so much all the time, and we get busy, we get hot, we get tired, we want to cut corners, and that's when mistakes happen and people get hurt and things go wrong. So if you, in other words, you're hot, you're tired, you don't want to mess with it, you just want to go, oh, I'm just going to go run in the house real quick and do something, I'll be right back. And if you leave a pesticide container sitting out and a kid comes along and gets into it, somebody gets hurt, you're liable for that, and it's just because you were cutting corners. Take the time to do things right. Don't cut corners, okay? Do it right, and find a way for you to be able to do these things right so that it flows smoothly. If something is a problem that's causing you to cut corners or not do things right, then find a better way to do that. And there again, if you can't think of a way on your own, get a hold of somebody that has some experience, somebody in the field that's been doing it a long time, or your distributor. A lot of these guys that we buy our chemicals from, they have been in the business a long time, and they know what other people are doing. They know some of the tricks of the trade. They know the equipment and some of the stuff that's out there that might help you to be able to do your job more efficiently and be able to do it easier and safer. So you want to bring up these things and talk about it. And if you're having something that you're struggling with and it's taking you a lot of time and it's a safety issue, but you're thinking about skipping that just because you're thinking it's not worth it, don't do that. Find a way, find the equipment that works for you, find a system that works for you. But what will happen is, once you start cutting corners and getting lazy and getting complacent in doing things the wrong way, then something goes wrong. Okay, it's the first time when you're mixing chemicals and you don't have glasses on, and you go to shake up a jug and the lid comes off and you get something in your eye. And then you realize really quick just how strong and how dangerous these chemicals are, because we can use them correctly, and we use we use gloves and we're using glasses and we're being very careful and nothing goes wrong. It almost can tend to seem like you don't really even need this stuff because you're being careful and you haven't had any accidents. But then when the accident happens, when the jug falls, you tip something over, it splashes, when the hose on a high pressure rig breaks, something like that, and you're standing right next to it, believe me, you're going to be glad that you had your hat on and your glasses and your gloves. You're going to be glad you're wearing long sleeve shirts and long pants and rubber boots. You're going to want to be as covered up and protected as you can be when things go wrong. So think about it before you start. Think about the job and what you need. Think about, what if something goes wrong while I'm doing that job? Do I have the stuff I need for that too? Personal protective equipment, also known as PPE. Let's talk about that a little bit, okay? So, what do you need? What kind of personal protective equipment do you need? Do you need goggles that go all the way around over your glasses? Well, that depends on if you wear glasses or not, right? Okay. Or do you just want some, you know, like this, that are just kind of like sunglasses that go on, or do you need a full face shield? So there again, that depends. It depends. You're going to have to ask yourself, what are you doing? Are you mixing? Are you loading pesticides? Are you doing a fogger? Okay, so if you're loading pesticides and you have 55-gallon drums of pesticides, and you're gonna be lifting those up and putting them on a truck, and there's a chance that that could fall, you're gonna want to think about, man, what if something goes wrong? So you're gonna want to think about what you're gonna need. For sure, you're gonna want to have some rubber boots, right? And you're gonna want to wear some eye protection. But also you have to think about what's on the label. What kind of a pesticide is it? Is it something that has a danger or a warning or a caution on it? That depends on whether or not you need to wear a full chemical suit or not, okay? So you want to think about, you know, what you need to wear. And another thing of when you're thinking about what kind of personal protective equipment that you need, you got to think about, where are you using the product, okay? Are you going to be using the product outside, or are you going to use it inside? Okay, so if you're using a product inside and it's in a ventilated area, then you probably don't really need more than maybe just a hat and some glasses and some gloves. You know, there's different kinds of gloves. Like I like to use these gloves when I'm applying. The chemical's already been mixed. I don't have much contact with chemical at all. If it is, it's, you know, usually just by accident. And these gloves work great. But when I'm mixing chemical and it's straight out of the jug, I like to use these gloves. They give me a little more protection. They're bigger. I can roll the sleeves up farther, and it helps. So there's something else you want to think about. Also, when it comes to these gloves, when I put these gloves on, they work fine. You know, these gloves are chemical resistant gloves, so those work fine. But when you look at these, you can see they're more protection. And also, I want to point out something else to you about this. You notice this cuff on this that's been turned up like that, okay? That's not by accident, or it's not just to make it look stylish. That's for reason. The reason that we turn these cuffs up on this is if you're working with a pesticide and your gloves are all wet and you lift your hands up, that pesticide can run down. If it runs off of this glove, it'll go right onto my arm and down into my sleeve and get my clothes wet, get onto my skin. That could be bad, okay? Especially if I'm mixing and that pesticide is 100%, you know, if it's right out of the jug and I'm pouring and I get some of that on me and it's dripping and it's running. A lot of times when you have things dripping off your hands it's pesticide, you don't want it to fall on the ground, so you tend to turn your hands up like this and it'll run down, but it'll run into this cuff and it'll stop that from getting on your clothes or getting on your skin. So, different kinds of personal protective equipment depending on what it is that you're doing, okay? Ventilated or not, you know, if you're inside of a house and, you know, houses are ventilated and airflow and that's fine, but what if you're doing a treatment under a house? Well, some houses are ventilated, they have air that flows through, and others are not. Some you're in areas with no ventilation. And in that case, you're gonna probably need a respirator. So you need to read your label. Does it call for a respirator in an unventilated area? So that's gonna help you make that decision or not, whether you need a respirator. You know, the type of personal protective equipment that you wear is going also to depend on the kind of equipment that you use, okay? So let me give you an example. if I'm spraying inside of a house and I'm just using, let me show you like this sprayer here. Okay, so here's just your standard B&G hand sprayer, right? So if I'm in a house and I'm just spraying with that, you know, I would probably just wear some small gloves and my regular hat. We always carry hats. Okay, so we always carry hats, like a dozen hats in the truck. There again, if something goes wrong, you get pesticide on it, or they just get dirty, and we just throw them out, and we keep clean hats, clean shirts. We keep towels, water, soap for cleaning over here in this side, the toolbox. Okay, so I've got some hand soap here. Okay, I've got water, I've got shirt, I got hat. All right, so these are all some of the things that I carry on my truck. But if I'm spraying inside of a house, I would probably just wear this hat, okay? But if I'm spraying out in a field and it's windy especially, and I'm using, say, this big power sprayer or some other kind of a power spray rig that puts out a lot more pesticide outside in a spray application of a broadcast kind of spray, and there's a good chance that I'm going to get some drift or some of it to blow back on me, then I'm going to want to wear a chemical resistant hat that has a wide brim on it. Okay, so it depends. You want to think about what kind of chemicals that you're using, because some of those chemicals that you use in a broadcast treatment, especially for agricultural purposes, they require a chemical suit. You have to wear a chemical resistant suit. But none of the chemicals I use require that, so we usually are wearing long sleeve shirt and hat. We wear rubber boots when we're spraying, when we're doing power sprays. We make sure we have a hat and gloves. And so all of that depends on the equipment that you're using as much as the pesticide. So, you know, the pesticide itself will determine too, because a low toxicity pesticide doesn't require any more than some gloves, some eye protection, hat. Doesn't even have to be a wide brimmed hat if you're just applying inside, and if it's a low toxicity product. Regular clothes, it doesn't have to be a chemical resistant suit. You can wear shirt, pants, those kind of thing is all acceptable on a low toxicity product. Okay, so with a high toxicity product, you would have to wear a chemical suit and maybe even a respirator, and some of them actually require an oxygen tank, and depending on what you're using. So you got to read that label. So you might need to wear goggles for some things, or just splash resistant, goggles, glasses like this. But then other chemicals might require you to wear a face shield when you're pouring or mixing chemicals. So look at the label and make sure that you have the proper protective equipment for whatever kind of pesticide it is that you're using. Okay, so you just got to think about what it is you're doing, what you're using, and what kind of personal protective equipment you use. If we're using our spray rig and we're going to be, using this to spray up around the eaves of the houses, we want to make sure that we have some protection on any time that we're applying a pesticide above our head. We want to make sure we have a hat on. So it just depends on where you're applying the pesticide, what pesticide you're using, and what kind of equipment that you're using that determines what type of personal protective equipment that you need. Okay. Okay, so what kind of equipment should you use? Okay, let's talk about that. The equipment, the best way to decide what kind of equipment that you should use is to talk to your distributor that you buy your pesticides from. Let them know what you're doing with it and where you're applying it, and they can give you some really good advice on what type of equipment. They can even hook you up with the distributors that sell the equipment, and a lot of times these guys are doing they have training programs that they can put you through, and so you want to talk to your distributors, let them know what you're trying to do, make sure that you getting equipment that's the right for the job and that you understand, that you know how to use it. You know, so and to find out how to use it, like I say, you can talk to them, or in a lot of cases take a class that will certify you in different kinds of equipment from the distributor that makes it. Another thing that you got to think about when you're trying to decide what kind of equipment to use is you have to think about what kind of a job it is that you're doing. Okay, so when we're spraying around houses, you could just use a hand sprayer and do a general pest treatment around a house, or you might want to use the power sprayer like what's mounted in the back of the truck. So you have to decide, if I'm going to be spraying for wasps and it's just a one-story house and I can reach all the way around the eaves, I could use the hand sprayer. I might go that route. But if it's a big two-story house, or it's got big, tall, pitches in the roof, and there's just no way to get there to reach it, then you might have to use a power sprayer to do it. So the job itself is going to determine a lot of times what kind of equipment that you need to use. So another thing is, pesticides and herbicides cannot be mixed. So my spray rig has one 50-gallon tank in it, and I put pesticides in it. Now, if I wanted to put a herbicide in it to kill weeds, I cannot put it in the same tank. I'd have to have two separate tanks. So if you were gonna spray yards for weeds and you're gonna spray yards for bugs, then you would want to buy the right kind of equipment so that you could split, have two tanks, and you could mix the product in each one. So there again, you want to communicate with what kind of work and what kind of pests you're going to be killing and what kind of jobs you're doing, and make sure that you buy the right equipment for the job. Okay, so when it comes to the hand sprayers, sometimes some pest control companies will want to have two sprayers, one for a repellent and one for a non-repellent. The repellents are designed to run bugs away. The non-repellents are just the opposite. They do not repel bugs, they let them walk through them. Usually they have a transfer effect to that product, so it gets on them and it'll transfer to the other bugs. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to have a non-repellent and mixed in here, and then the next job you're going to use a repellent, say, that's in there. Now, if you go and you mix a non-repellent again, and you've had a repellent in there, it might counteract what you're trying to do. So in other words, if you're using a non-repellent and you've had a repellent in there, it might be some of that left, and it might still repel the pest. So you might want to have two separate pieces of equipment, one for repellents, one for non-repellents. That's a rule of thumb that a lot of pest control companies go by. Another thing that will determine on what kind of equipment to use, of course, is the pesticide. Now, some pesticides, they come in a powder form, and other pesticides come in a liquid form. And usually you can use the same equipment for both, but sometimes some of those products you don't want to use the same equipment that you've been mixing a powder or something in. It just depends on the product that you're using. So there again, read the label, make sure that it's compatible with other products. Sometimes powders can tend to clog up your spraying equipment. So it just depends on what you're using. You want to read the label and talk to your distributors about that. And another thing that's going to determine how much or what kind of equipment that you use is how much product do you need to apply. Okay, so if I'm just going to apply a gallon or less around a house, this hand sprayer works just fine. Now, if you were doing a large job in say maybe it's a something like an apartment complex or a big business or several houses in a neighborhood, you can buy backpack sprayers that carry more product, and some of them have a handle on the side of it where you can pump it up as you're spraying. So if you're doing a bigger job, you might want something so that you don't have to stop and remix as often, and it's a little more time efficient. Now on the other hand, if you're going to be spraying like an acre or a half an acre, then I'm going to be wanting to use this big power spray rig to do that. Then you're going to step it up and say, well, what if you're going to spray several acres or 100 acres, big on a farmer's field? So that is going to be another kind of equipment that you're going to use. You're going to need special equipment to do spraying like that. So take a look at your job. The size of the job will determine what kind of equipment that you use. Another thing that determines for me what kind of equipment to use is how high I'm spraying. We talked about spraying around eaves on houses. Also trees. If you're going to be spraying trees, some trees can be very tall, and so that could tell you what kind of equipment you're going to use. I'm certainly not going to spray a big oak tree with a hand sprayer. I'm going to have to use a power sprayer on that. So how high that you have to treat will determine not only what kind of personal protective equipment you want to wear, but also what kind of equipment that you're going to use to be able to do that. Because you want to be able to use the right equipment that's going to get a uniform coverage and be able to apply it at the proper rate, even if it's way up high or far away from you where we can't normally reach. You still want to get the right application rates. There's foamers that you can use with some of the products, like for instance some of the pesticides, like here this product here, Tarrant, is also, it's an insecticide, but it's also a termiticide. So when you're using a product like that, okay, like this for instance, I could mix this product and put it in a hand sprayer and spray it just with a liquid. But there's also something that's called a foamer, and it looks kind of like this, and you can pump it up. They also, that would be a hand pump foamer, but they also have electric ones that come in cases, and you fill up the canister, and then you plug it in, and it pressurizes it. And these foamers are designed so that you can mix a termiticide when you, for instance, if you have to treat in between two walls or in between a wall, and because if you have termites in a wall, in the wood inside the wall, if you were just to mix this up with water and put it in here, and you drill a hole in the wall and you spray that product in, it's just going to run down and then probably out the bottom and leak onto the floor, and you're not going to get the desired results. The product's not going to stay on target. It's going to move, and you don't want that. In some cases you do, in some cases you don't. But if you're trying to do a wall void treatment, what you can do is take this product, mix it with a foaming agent, which is basically like a soap, a real thick foamy, it makes it thick like a shampoo kind of a foam. Not the kind of foam that when you can buy and you spray in a hole and it foams up and it seals hard like that. We're not talking about that kind of foam. We're talking about a wet foam, a wet shampoo, kind of real thick shampoo foam. So what you do is you would take this product and mix it with some water and a foaming agent, and you would mix that into a foamer. And the foamer, whether it looks like this or it's a box, whatever it looks like, and you would plug that in, and then when you apply it, it mixes it with a lot of air, and it comes out, and it sprays it out in a foam, in a real thick foam. So now you could drill a hole in a wall if you had termites that's in that wood in between that wall, and instead of just mixing it with water, putting it in there and it runs out and it runs all over the floor, now you can mix that with a foaming agent, put it in there real thick like a shampoo, and it foams up, and it'll fill that whole wall void. You could just fill it with that, and it'll take hours, if not days, for that to kind of just disintegrate and go down back into a water form. But meanwhile, it sits on that wood, and that wood will soak that up and absorb it slowly, and so that termiticide that's in that foam will get absorbed into the wood, and it doesn't make just a big puddle down in the bottom. So there's a good case of what you're applying, what you need to apply it for. So here's the same product, Tarrant, that we could use, say, on ants. If you had fire ants that were getting in a house, we could mix that with a hand sprayer with water and spray for it, and it works great. But if those were, say, carpenter ants, and they were inside the wood, and you can't get to them, we could mix this with some foam and foam that wall void, and it'll definitely get to them and wipe them out, even if it's termites. That's the way that we deal with termites. So whether it's termites or carpenter ants, we can deal with them the same way a lot. But so this is a dual product. It's an insecticide because it kills insects, but it's also a termiticide, and it kills termites as well. So there again, we can mix that with a foamer. In this case, the type of equipment that you would use, it would be determined by the type of the job of what you're doing. And in this case, we were wanting to mix it with foam, so we would use a foamer. Foggers. If you use a fogger, sometimes you have a pesticide and say you need to fog an attic. They make these things that are called foggers that you mix it and you can start it up, and then it blows out and there's a bunch of fog. But you're going to want to wear the proper protective equipment. You're going to want to wear a mask or a respirator, depending on if you're in a ventilated area or not. And depending on what the chemical is, like if you're using a fogger, say you're spraying for mosquitoes, and so you're fogging for that, or say you're doing a treatment up in an attic and you need to fog. Well, then that would call for that type of machine called a fogger. And if you do that, then there again, you're going to have to wear the protective equipment that goes along with that type of equipment. When you're doing foggers, this stuff goes everywhere, and you're probably going to have to wear a chemical resistant suit, or at least a full face mask or a respirator for that. So make sure you read the labels and you understand what you have to wear, how to apply it, and make sure that you're using the right equipment for what you're trying to do. It's very important that whatever product you're applying and whatever equipment that you're using, that you understand how to apply it, the dangers of that chemical, and what kind of personal protective equipment that you must use. The PPE is there for your safety. If you start cutting corners, that's where accidents happen, and then you end up getting something on your skin, or you get in your eye, or something happens, and that's how you end up getting sick or getting hurt. So make sure that you're wearing the proper protective equipment for whatever the label and the job calls for.